I've made my decision. We'll actually do the talk. Why not? It's a lot of fun. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the talk. Styles, Trends, Immersion, Abstraction, Developing UI Art Direction. First thing I want to talk about is do not have a really long, wordy title for your talk because it's really hard to tell people what it's called and where it will be. So that's pro tip number one. This is me. I'm Leanne. I'm the discipline head for UI and UX at the Atom Hawk Advanced team. I'm a massive nerd. Do enjoy cosplaying, do enjoy video games, have done since forever. This is the about me bit, by the way. I had to write a bio for SEC, and I haven't seen it anywhere, but in it, if you found it and you read it, I wrote that Nights into Dreams on the Sega Saturn is my all-time favorite game ever. And that is not what that image should look like. So that is promising for the rest of the talk, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, I've been into video games since I was a dot. Sega were always my consoles when I was growing up. I think this game was the point where I realized that this whimsical, fun, inventive universe was like, it's a hobby and it's something I'm going to do forever. And I like to bake cakes around games as well. So I did also write that I am a 2-time Gamer Bake winner. And this was the first cake that won me an apron. It was called Prepare to Diet. Yes, there's jokes in this talk. And yeah, I work for Atom Hawk, specifically on the advanced team. If you were in Dan's talk yesterday, and I think everybody was in Dan's talk yesterday, so you probably saw this slide already. But yeah, we have 3 physical locations and quite a big remote team as well. We've been doing outsource art, like partnership with the games industry for a long time. Lots of people. We make the unbelievable believable. The advanced team was set up a couple of years ago during pandemic, which is why we're a remote team. And hello to the advanced team at home who couldn't make it today. And on our team, we've got engineers, technical artists, UI artists and designers, and UX designers. We do everything you need, really, that's art-based: tools, building, tech art support. For the UI and UX team, which obviously that's my wheelhouse, that's what I do, we have a whole farm-to-fork service line. So we can do your wireframes and your grey boxing, your UX design, all the way through to your mock-ups, what that's going to look like in game, asset production, all the way up to implementation. So that's kind of what we do. So let's talk about UI art. Who here works in UI? Yeah, that's like a lot of us. That's what. Who here would like to work in UI but doesn't? Oh, I like that. That's cool. Who didn't put their hand up for the last 2 questions? Now we have 100% audience participation. So this might seem like a really bizarre slide for everybody who actually does talk about UI art a lot, and it's part of our job and it's what we do. But what I've found over the years is we don't actually talk about it enough at the right times with the right people. And that means that unless you've got a director team on your game that are very player facing, like they look at everything from the player's point of view, your UI gets left behind. It gets left until the last possible minute to be implemented. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. Most of the stuff in this talk is anecdotal information. It's theory crafting that I've done over the years. There's no hard science to this, unlike UX. So we need to talk about it more. We need to talk about it at the right times with the right people. And why doesn't this scroll? No notes. But first, we're going to talk about UX. This isn't a bait and switch, though, don't worry, because we're not actually going to talk about wireframes, we're not actually going to talk about grey boxes. But before we can start doing anything with the UI art, it's super important that we have an understanding of the UX in general, because the UI, the artwork has to support the design, right? It has to serve the game, it has to serve the user experience we're trying to create overall. So we need to understand that, but we don't need to understand this at the very beginning. We just need to know the vibe of your game. Justine, I'm so sorry I didn't clear this with you before, but appreciate it. We just need to know the vibe. What is the game that you're trying to make? And hopefully, no matter what stage in your game's production you're already at, you have an idea of this. You already know this. It's already established across the design team, across everybody in the studio, and you're all behind that idea. And that moves us on to my first cryptic header. So knowing the vibe of the game, we're going to plot it on this line, which is also a bar. But a line just wasn't going to look very effective on the big screen. But to make this a scale and to make this useful, we're going to plot some points at either end of it. We're going to have immersion at one end of this scale, and we're going to have abstraction at the other end. Probably could have done like points for guessing what's going to be on here if you were reading the header of the talk. But knowing the vibe, knowing kind of the game that you're trying to make, you should be able to plot a point on this line somewhere between immersion and abstraction. Immersion, I hope, is pretty well understood. Like, it is an immersive experience where we want the player to completely suspend their disbelief and be involved, blinkered into the game world. Abstraction is the term that we're using for I'm playing a video game and I am very aware of the fact that I'm playing a video game, and that's okay because it's a video game and that's what I wanted from this amount of time that I was spending. But to kind of contextualize this a little bit, if you had a sci-fi third-person survival horror game, where on this do we think we're going to want to put that for funsies? There's some points, which is good. Yeah, we want it way down in Immersion Town, actually probably a bit further along the line than that. Because otherwise, those horror notes, that survival mechanic, it's not going to hit if like everything hasn't bought into this idea that it is an immersive experience. And on the flip side of that, if we had an arcade score attack mobile rhythm action game, probably don't need to be as immersive an experience. I'm not saying that a horror version of that doesn't exist, probably does, but it's probably going to be more over in abstraction. We know we're playing a game because there's scores flying everywhere. There's like a 3-star rating at the end of it. We knew what we were doing. So a small note on this, if your game is like so immersive that we would plot it like literally the other side of the line, that's Journey. That is a game with like no UI. We're taking it away from the player completely. We don't need it. Everything is in the flow and the play and the experience that we're creating. Also, you probably don't need to watch the rest of the talk. You can go get coffee because there's no UI to be had here. Equally, this is not an exact science. We're not saying our game is going to be 75% abstracted or 23% immersive. It's a vibe, it's a feeling, it's the first point that we're getting on, and we're going to build on top of it. But we just need to like establish somewhere on here where that's going to be. And we can also look at this line as a timeline for your project. If you're making a very immersive game, you need to be having these conversations. You need to be plotting this as early as possible in that process. You can't make a truly immersive game experience if you consult the UI team at the very end, because you're going to get a stick-on HUD, and that's going to distract from your game. We can't help you if you don't help yourself by getting us in those conversations, collaborating with us at the very beginning of it. And equally, if it's a very abstracted game where the way that we're presenting the information is not critical to the player's experience, but they do need to know it, it can be sometime before launch. And there are advantages to leaving it as late as humanly possible, but so long as it has been planned and timed for and costed, and everybody knows that this block of time is when we're going to be changing over the UI from what was there to what it's going to be. You can't just do this and expect everyone to crunch for the last 6 weeks of the project. Not okay. You can do it at the end of the project. Plan for that. Know that that's what the plan is. Make sure it's in everybody's agenda. The second cryptic header. So like I said, we've got a line, we've got a vibe, kind of know what we're doing from here. We're going to add some layers on this, like oogers. And the first one is going to be, okay, where can we get our user interface art direction from? Over in Immersion land, we can get it from the game world. In fact, we absolutely should be getting it from the game world. We should be working with the game and lifting as much of the UI from the technology of the world as humanly possible. And by technology, I'm not just talking about computers. You know, if the whole game is carved in stone, that's the technology of the game world. But in abstraction, we can use a metaphor loosely based on something from the game world. That character's got a really cool hat. I'm going to make my UI based on that. We're going to do some examples. We're going to get into it. So if we had a very immersive title and we're lifting all of our UI from the game world, that would be Alien Isolation, which does this beautifully. It does a really good job of making sure that all of the UI in this game is of the technology in the world. And it's physically in the world as well. Like, these are points that you have to go and interact with. There's a great understanding of, like, we're going to create these moments of heightened terror, because if you want to interact with a thing, it's going to make noise, it's going to cause the aliens to know your position. So there's a real risk and reward between using these things that other games would take for granted. Like, they would have this radar just stuck on the screen so you could see the position of the aliens whenever you want. But if you have to actually look at it, then you're not looking around the room, and it adds to that whole survival and horror moment of it. And they also had this great philosophy on the game where if they couldn't have made it for the film in 1979, then they didn't make it for the game. So everything had to be clunky, everything had to be purposeful, everything had to have this aesthetic to it. And I mean, they were very lucky to work with such a great franchise and have that wealth of information, have all of that stuff. But they even took it to, like, any of the stuff that then did appear on the UI, it was made, it was put onto VHS tape, it was put onto a CRT TV, it was recorded from that, and then it was put back in the game. That is a level of using the technology of the world that most games will not go to, and probably, I don't know if you need to, but I love that they did that. So that's a very immersive experience that uses the technology of the game world to create its user interface, and all of it, and like everything buys into that UX. Also, apologies if that's not terribly visible with the lights. So on the other end, we're going to look at a metaphor example. And we've got Genshin Impact, which is very much a video game TM. It has all the trappings of a JRPG. It's got a layer of microtransaction and gacha to it. I'm sure everybody's played it. But it's got a couple of metaphors running through it. And one of them is like this idea of the spell book, or the celestial book, and also the star charts that they have in the game. And that's a theme that they carry out throughout, like, pretty much all of the UI. This is a bit more obvious on the mobile version of the game than the console version, but that blue banner is the ribbon from the book because it has a little notch at the bottom. And it does have this idea of, like, turning pages to look through your inventory and the things that you need to display on the screen. And again, they go back to this idea of star charts a lot, where they bring it through the backgrounds, they bring it through most of the elements that they're looking at in the game. So now we're going to add some more layers. We're going to add when we're picking the UI from. So with the immersion, we can look at the era as in the period of time, or the art movement or graphic design movement of that time. And the other end of the scale, we've got trending now. So again, where we looked at this as like a timeline before, we can look at this as a timeline again, from everything from when the game is set to what is actually happening outside the game world, in the real world, things that are trending now. Example time again. So in Immersion, I'm going to call it Pentiment, which is a game set in 1518, and it's very specifically set in 1518 because it was like the era of the printing press taking over from the handwritten books, from, you know, the medieval time to the modern age. And it's great. I mean, my note here says, try not to gush about Pentiment, probably fail. And whereas Genshin Impact had this like metaphor of books in it, so it was taking elements from it, it was borrowing from it. It had this idea of like, we're looking through pages and we have like some bits that you expect to see in a book, especially like a big fantasy spell book. Pentiment, it is the book. You are literally playing it inside a window in the book, and every time you have to like step back from it to either look at the character information or to highlight a tooltip for things that get highlighted. And I absolutely love the really long fingers as well. They're great. But it takes the book down. So you go from being like, I'm in the game world, I'm experiencing it through this illustration in this book too. I've put the book down because I just need to check a footnote that's happening. And they also went like one extra with the fonts. Usually with fonts, we're like, you can have two. You can have a header font and you can have a copy font, and that's it. Maybe give you a third one for subtitles. If you're really lucky, you can have an extra one for the game logo. But with these guys, we're like, no, we're going to have one for every different class of people that live in this world, because we want to really like describe the characters in this game through every means possible. So every different class, every different like social structure has a different script. And when it comes in as well, the way the fonts are animated in this game, it's just chef's kiss. I'm gushing. I said I was going to fail. But it scrolls in, and then the ink dries, and it changes color when it does that. And then they scratch out mistakes and they correct them. I love that. The printer type, I don't want to spoil it if you've not played Pentiment, but it's just outstanding. They went above and beyond. But they also realized that that's not going to fly with everybody. That's going to detract from people's experience. So they gave us an option to not have that, and I love them for that as well. So we're also going to look at an example down the other end of the table. And if that doesn't make you want to play the game, I don't know what will. So something trending now. And just to be spicy, I'm going to pick a game that came out 7 years ago. Voez, which is a rhythm action game on mobile by Rayark, came out at a time when the hipster cross logo was really big everywhere. And I don't know if that was like an inspiration behind the choices that they made with the UI here, or if it was a happy accident that they had this theme of triangles and they used diamonds, and it created the hipster cross motif that they used on like their social medias and their websites and throughout a lot of their different marketing for it. But it just all fit in with what was happening at the time, which was kind of fun. But this game really quadruples down on diamonds. Everything is diamonds in the game. That was like the one thing that they were going to use. They got flat design, which is very hip then and right now. They've got this hipster logo that I don't know if it was an accident or not, but I'm going to say for the purpose of this talk, they meant it. And it's still, like, even today, if you look at the screenshots from that game, it looks fresh. It doesn't look like a game that's like of a time capsule of mobile games that were popular 7 years ago. It's also a really fun rhythm action game if you're into that. And this is going to kind of like be the layers that we're going to focus on. These are the points that we need to establish along this line. This is our onion. These are the layers. And there are other examples that we can call out in here, and I'm happy to talk about this afterwards with people. And like I say, it doesn't matter where you are on the line, so long as you pick something. The next cryptic header. So we're going to have one more topic, which again, if you had the title of the talk, actually, I don't know if I put this in the title. Don't have a wordy title for your talk because you forget it. But we're going to top it off with genre and platform. And these are important to look at for a couple of reasons, and mostly because of affordances and competition. So when we're designing a UI for a game, we absolutely want to look at our competition because we want to know where we're going to line up against that. And it's always good to it's another place we can draw inspiration from for our UIs. And things like, you can see where games have looked at other games that have been like, that's got a theme that I really like. We're going to lean into that and we're going to explore it and make it bigger or more bombastic. But affordances are super important as well, especially from the UX point of view. Because if you're making a genre game, then players are going to come to it with expectations because they've played other games in that genre and they've spent way more time in that game than they have in your game because your game doesn't exist yet. If you're making a looter shooter game, you are going to need a variation of these colors. Like, that's a given. I would prefer it if you used pink instead of purple because these two are too close, but that's just something that we know. So when you look at the genre and you look at the expectations and you're like, we really want to make this game, it's going to have this really cool art style. It's like, we only want to use black and white. It's like, yeah, but you've got a loop hierarchy, so we're going to have to do something in here. Or we're going to have a really fun way that bucks that trend. And you want to know what your competition are doing. Not necessarily because you want to copy them, though. I want to have a word with mobile developers in general, because if I didn't put that these were all different games, would you know? Or is it 6 shots of the same game? But it's not just mobile that are doing this, apparently. Flat design, it giveth and it taketh away, I think. And it's only getting worse, actually. When Finals came out, being the newest of these guys, the flat design trend is getting starker and more monochromatic and more empty space. It's becoming a lot barer. And games seem to be following in with that trend as well. We need to look at trends. We need to look at what's happening. Flat design came about because it was a rebellion against skeuomorphic design. And if you've got your bingo cards out, I hope you're ticking all the boxes. But what we are starting to see in graphic design is trends that are coming out that are starting to be like, actually, we don't want everything to be in boxes and we don't want everything to be black and white and minimalistic. And hopefully this is where we're going to start seeing games leaning into this. I had really high hopes for Finals, and that has disappointed me. But I'm going to be positive about it because it was just for the beta, so they've got time. And that's the information of those games. But yes, so what we're seeing come up in graphic design at the moment is this maximalist design is propping up. Very colorful, very collagey, very full-on and intense. And this isn't going to work for a UI necessarily. It could do, though, and that would be a really exciting game if your game design UI was all part of this puzzle. But things are getting more colorful. They are getting bolder. They're getting more brutalist, which we like. And we're looking back a lot at what I'm going to call retro wave, because it doesn't matter what time period you're coming from, if it's synthwave volume 3, which we're in at the moment for the 80s, or 70s wave, or 90s, or Y2K revival. Choices have been made and not by me. We're seeing a lot of that coming in at the moment as well. And whilst skeuomorphic design is not necessarily making a comeback, and I'm not totally convinced that it will at the moment, we are seeing a lot of this idea of real-world materials being used in textures for our graphic design choices. Like glass morphism is kind of coming back a little bit, but also liquid metal and holomorphism. Lots of morphisms. If you were taking a shot every time I said that, apologies. But the important thing here with all of this is that we think about the box. So it doesn't matter if you're going to do all of your competitor analysis and throw it out the window, or if you're going to look at everything that's kind of trending in graphic design and be like, yes, we're going to double down on that. You need to know what the constraints of that box are, and that's what doing this analysis of the genre and doing this analysis of your competitors gives you. It gives you the parameters of the box, and then it's your choice to do what you want with the box. This is not a cryptic header. What was I thinking? And this is not so much like okay, now I'm going to take you through a step-by-step of how I do this process in my everyday work cycle. Because it's not about that. This is a bunch of ideas, a bunch of kickoff talking points, a nice diagram with an onion on it that you can take to your team and try and explain why there's an onion on it. But why we do this, or why we should be doing this, is because it gives us a tool set to communicate the reasons why we want to do what we want to do with the UI. And the reasons why we want to have this point plotted and these tick box exercises done and these images generated based around those headers that we've created is because it helps us to create strong foundations and consistency throughout our UI. Essentially, by taking this line and going through the headers, we're anchoring our decisions. So we're making it clear for the player every single hurdle. Like the last thing you want is an inconsistent UI. You want those choices to be very purposeful and decisive. So you go through this process and you pick these things and you're like, you know, your game has its pillars, your art Bible has its pillars, and now your UI has its pillars as well, because we've gone through this process and we've picked them. And then ultimately that gets us to what we want, which is not just a game with a beautiful UI, but a game that maybe you can recognize just from its UI. or, you know, a UI that is so purposeful and iconic and haunts people when they try and sleep at night, or a UI that gets cosplayed at events, because why wouldn't it? But also sparks a whole revolution in how we do UI. I want to see more games leaning to, does anyone want to say what the game is before I? Persona. That's for the people who are not UI designers, this is Persona. You know, Hi-Fi Rush came out recently, and you could see the lineage. You could see the decisions made. It's like somebody watched Spider-Verse and played Persona and went, that. And I said I was going to talk fast. And we're at the end. Yay. And I put it on again just to... but we do have lots of time for questions now. So please wait for the mic. And if you have a question, let me know.
Hello.
Hello.
So you talked about, man, that's loud. You talked about trends. I'm just wondering where beyond games would you look for trends in everyday life, really? Because I can imagine that a lot of branding and marketing for even like sportswear and things like that will make a big impact on what's actually happening in the, you know, contemporary market.
Yep, 100%. And I think if you watch the trailer for a marathon when that came out, you could see like that's been influenced a lot by all the marketing that's been used for sportswear today. Like there's like a clear line through that, but anywhere. So the reason why you want to have like some of these headers is because if you know that you're going to be set in a game, it's going to be quite an immersive experience, and we're going to set it in the 70s, then that anchors you, and you can like, okay, what did the 70s do visually? So we're looking at clothes, we're looking at movies, we're looking at graphic design, we're looking at different bits of advertisement, product design, all of those things. I think Headlander is a really good example of this as well, where they're like, we want to be a 70s game, but we're going to look at Barbarella, and that's going to be our focus point for it. We're going to have 70s orange and Barbarella, go. So yeah, everywhere. But if you've at least narrowed it down a little bit so that you know, okay, we're going to look at fashion design, but specifically from the 1990s, then you've got a starting point. And from there, you'll go on to, okay, well, how are they, you know, advertising sketches in the 90s? What was the choices they were making? Or those big bubble watches that I can't remember the name of, right? And it kind of like starts to fill out your mood board. So from looking at trends, don't just look at video games because they've been based by other things as well, but look at everything around, everything that you see. When you're working UI or graphic design, you can't go to the bus stop without going, oh, that's a choice they made. Like, that's cool. I'm going to take a photo of that and show my friends. It's an advert for toothpaste, but it was cool. That kind of thing. But yeah, anything visual, basically, is what I would say there.
Thank you. That was a great talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's very few days that go by that I don't think about the Persona 4 UI. Because it is incredible. But I was going to say, like, on the sort of the graph of metaphor to immersive, like, it feels like it's almost a bit out of place in its own category. It's like artistic, like really artistic, like it's actually doing its own thing. And do you think that is, or where would you plot it in between metaphor and immersion?
Over sort of towards abstraction more because of the way the game mechanics work. It's like it's very HUD driven, and we know that we're playing a video game. But I see a clear line between these teenagers who read manga, and that's our inspiration. So the metaphor is, what if they were looking at it through like a lens that they were the heroes in a manga? Because you look at the way they panel stuff and the way they cut out stuff. If I was going to do like a target for it, it's like manga ransom note. That's the Persona UI vibe. I don't know why ransom note came to mind, but there you go. Like, because they got the cutout text. But I would put it more down in abstraction and metaphor because there's nothing. I mean, I'm sure mangas do exist in the game world as a technology, but they've got like they're teenagers that read comic books. That's what we're going to use. That's our wrapper for that. Did that answer the question?
Yeah. It was also more like it being its own art form, the UI
Yeah.
being an actual central.
But I think that came after. So like at the point where they'd established it and they were going with it, they were rolling with it and they loved it and it was giving all the juice that they wanted, released it out into the wild, and then we're all like, so that's its own category. So we can have that as being, are you making an immersive game, an abstracted game, or Persona? Like, that's what you're going for there.
Thank you. So if I was coming at a UI, I think I would be way more intimidated by that metaphor abstraction end of the scale. And I kind of wondered if there was anything in your mind that you would break that down. Like, are there subscales? How do you go about creating a metaphor for something that maybe doesn't have one yet?
Yeah, this is why when you're at this end of the scale, it's better to leave it as late as possible, like whilst being realistic with it, whilst having that time frame to actually produce and implement the art. Because when the game's developing, when the narrative's developing, the characters are developing, the world's developing, there might be something in that as you go along where you're like, that is a really cool hat. Like, I'm not joking. It should be all about this hat. Like, let's make it its own character. Let's use that as the leapfrog. Or something will come up in the narrative that causes a spark. If you're trying to do something that's like super abstracted from the very beginning of the game, you'll find at the end of the game it might not gel anymore. So it's difficult. It's that end of the spectrum is much harder to work with. And that's why I say try and leave it as long as you can. Or depending on the type of game it is, that's where maybe, okay, what is trending now? Like, how much time do we have? When is it going to be launching? Does it make sense to do something that is very current and trending at the moment so that it fits in with the zeitgeist? And, you know, you're not going to have maybe that standout moment that you want, but everything will like be lush and work and be visually stimulating for the time that it comes out.
Thank you.
I hope that helps. There's a mischievous face.
Yeah, hello. So with the, let me try. I had it in my head and now it's gone. With immersive technology like VR, do you feel like we're going to start moving down towards the more immersive side of UI and UX design versus the abstraction?
Yeah, absolutely. And with VR design for UIs, I mean, that kind of, when I say, like, look at your competitors and establish what you want to do with the box. There is no box for VR design yet. We haven't established it yet because it's still quite a fresh and new, like, emerging technology, I guess. But if you're not utilizing the things in the environment, the world, the fact that you try to do a stick on hood with VR is hard because you don't know whether they're looking at any point. I mean, it's getting better because we're getting eye tracking with the newer versions of the headsets. So that is becoming a little bit more intuitive to build for. But I feel like you're already very immersed in the game. You're really missing a trick if everything isn't diegetic. Bingo. Yeah, I feel like you are missing the trick if you don't use the environment and the elements and the things around you to get that messaging across the player.
Nice, thank you.
There's one at the front here.
Hi. You mentioned the idea of kind of understanding what player conventions are, and and either sticking with them so the players who have played previous games understand your game from the get-go, or having a really good reason to kind of buck that trend. And I think that bucking that trend is always a really exciting prospect. But how do you balance kind of your team's want to do something that's brand new versus conforming to player expectation?
Test a lot, constantly. If you're doing something that is breaking convention and is doing something in a new way, get it to new players as much as possible, as quickly as possible, to prove out if your ideas are going to work or if they're just not ready for it yet, you know. But their kids are going to love it. Like, it might not be the time for it. You might have to do it later, but test a lot. And with VR, when you're doing this for VR, get people who have never been in VR before to do it as well. So people who don't have the expectations already established with them and don't have their VR legs, get them testing VR as quickly as possible, because what you think might be like, oh, that's super intuitive and it makes sense. They're like over here like, wow, look at the sky. Can't believe I'm under the water, right? It's like, yeah, but look at the rock. So you have to like figure out a ways to balance it, kind of thing. But yeah, if you're doing something new and creative, and you might think it's the best thing since sliced bread, but if it doesn't land, and this is where like the UI has to serve the UX, right? If it doesn't land with the audience, find another way, or, you know, smooth it out, iterate on it, find a way to get it somewhere in between the two. More questions? Time for everyone else.
Hello again.
Hello.
So one thing that I'm also curious about is how you tackle accessibility when it comes to creating the immersive side of UI? Because I imagine abstraction works a lot better for accessibility purposes.
Test. No, but in all seriousness, test with people who are that have those needs if it's available to you. So if you're doing a game where everything is very diegetic and you want to like, do we need to have a colorblind filter for this, or have we got enough high contrast in the elements that we don't need to do that because the color palette is in such a way that people with color blindness can tell the difference between X and Y, right? Or I'm trying to think of another like accessibility with like audio perception. Like if you're a hard of hearing player and you're playing it without audio for an immersive game, that can be quite tricky because then you are going to have some stick-on UI elements to aid the player's experience in those elements. So it's knowing when to add the help that players are going to need and know when the stuff that you've built, because you knew you wanted it to be as broad and accessible as possible, you've taken those considerations in, again, from as early as possible, from the very beginning, across the whole, all of the art and design team thinking about, okay, but you know, if I can't hear, how am I going to know that this is a thing that's happening without sticking on an arc with like, you're getting hit from the side moments, right? But if you can test with people who are affected by that, then that's the best way to know if what you're doing is succeeding.
Thank you very much. I guess that goes in testament to like planning early as well.
Yes, absolutely. Plan early and collaboratively. Like make sure you're having these conversations across departments, because with immersive games and when you're like utilizing the game world and the technology of the world to create all those things, your UI team, who are probably really good graphic designers but terrible at modeling things in the environment, they're not going to be creating your UI elements. Somebody else is. So you have to have those conversations early, otherwise it is not going to get done.
Thank you.
No worries. We still have time for questions.
Thank you. It's a great talk. I was wondering from like the outside perspective of people who aren't doing the UI but are like doing the initial inception of the game, like trying to come up with this, like, okay, I want to make a game that's going to be X, Y, and Z, and you're pitching it. Obviously, we want the players to be excited and engaged, but I don't really care about them because I don't work with them. What are considerations to take into account when going, all right, I want my UI team to be thrilled about this, about what they're going to be doing?
Okay, so are you a designer? Is that your specialism? Or?
No, but I'll pretend to be.
Okay, cool. There's a great GDC talk, and I forget the name of the guy who did it, called Designing Your Design Team, and he talks about that there's 4 different kinds of designer, and one of them is the empathetic designer, who always looks at everything from the player's point of view. They're always on that side of the camera thinking about, but what would it feel like, and what would it play like, and what would that look like? So if you've got a game idea and you want to pitch it and you want to get buy-in from the UI team, but you're not that person, but you know that person, speak to them, get them involved. So you can be like, I want this to be the mechanic, I want this to be the way that it works, but how do I translate that from a player's point of view? And they will be able to give you the answers of like, well, that's what this would look like. And then, or talk to your UI team. Like, we like to be in these conversations as early as possible. Like, even if you think it's just dry mechanics at this point, we can still see a way that this is going to end up on the screen, right? Or a bunch of different ways that this could end up on the screen. Then we have to pick one. So yeah, just tell them anyway.
Thank you very much.
Give them sweets first or something. I don't know. Like, go in with snacks.
Hello. Yeah, I was just thinking about like on the immersive end of the scale. How do you find that the balance is with like a gameplay situation where the actual game inherently is very gamey? So like let's say a 2D game, but the requirement is for it to be immersive, and how you balance those two things. Because like for example, Inside, I think that does a great job of being flat on, but also not really expelling the sort of the UI language. But I find that that's probably very few and far between, probably very difficult to do successfully.
Yeah, it's that whole thing of being aware of it from the very beginning and planning for it from the beginning. Because Pentiment is a 2D game, but it's a super immersive experience, because it's only when you actually like have to put the book down that you remember, oh yeah, no, this is a game based on illustrations and it's a murder mystery whodunit, but I'm so in the world right now. Like, So I think it can absolutely be done because you've still got the same tools, even if it's a 2D game. You still have an environment, you still have a character that can be showing you all this information instead of having it just as health bars on the HUD, right? You can show the character's health bar by how like outlined they are or colored in they are or how many layers they've got on them, that kind of thing. Or you can show clues to the environment in the environment. It doesn't have to be a waypoint map in the top corner, right? So there are ways to do it, but you have to know that that's what you want to achieve from the beginning. And so have those conversations and have that design mentality from the beginning.
Awesome, thank you.
And I guess like from this, like talk to, if you're having an immersive experience, talk to your UI UX team as early as possible because you might not have all, you might know that that's what you want to achieve, but you don't have all the solutions. Get them in the conversation. That's what it's all about. Yes.
Hello.
Whoa.
Oh my God.
Was anyone asleep? Anyone asleep?
That is very loud. I'm actually just interested in hearing about how your UI team is structured. Yeah, just can you tell me how that's structured?
We have a bunch of UI artists. No. So we have at Adam Hawk Advanced, we have a bunch of UI experts, and we're kind of all broad spectrum. We could do like from wireframing, grey boxing, all the way up to implementation. We just have different areas where we excel at. So some people are better at implementation and not so good at grey boxing, whereas some people are really good at the graphic design bit, but not so good at the implementation, that kind of thing. And when we work with clients on projects, usually what happens is we take one or two, preferably two, of our team and embed them with the team that we work with. So we work on a retainer basis, we embed with the client, and we try and get involved as much as possible because like with the whole process, like you can give us and this is slightly different to the Dan's team with the graphic design, you can give us an asset list and that's absolutely fine. But if that asset list is implement the health bars, but we're not going to tell you anything about how the health bars work, it's like, well, that's going to be difficult to implement unless we work with you closely. So that's kind of how we work. I don't know if that answers the question. I can talk to you later about it as well. If you have UI needs, we're here for you. We're not using that on any marketing stuff. With the finger guns.
Hey, thank you for the talk. I just wanted to know about your beliefs when it comes to hand-holding players. I'm kind of under the impression that we kind of do it a bit too much and we should just let players figure it out. There's kind of like a level of game literacy that most people have where they can get through just fine without loads of tutorials or UI elements. Do you, and especially with the way that things are going in terms of immersion and VR, do you think that we're going to some degree buck that trend and let players just be more exploratory in nature, or do you still think that the UI and like the environmental wayfinding and stuff is going to be even more crucial moving forward?
Totally depends on the game, because if you've got a game where exploration is your core pillar and you want the player to get in there and explore and get lost and then figure things out and have small rewards that build up to big rewards, then no, you don't want any hand holding. You just want to drop them in the world and be like, have fun. But if it's a game that's very mechanically driven with lots of rules and lots of things that kick off of events, then you're going to need to have hand holding. It's just, there is always a balance with that, but you have to introduce the player to how this thing works. Otherwise they will fail. It's just, you know, are you Dark Souls? Do you want them to fail? You want them to have that experience? You want them to be haunted by it for the rest of their lives? Or do you want them to like get those wins? I think, so there's a line here, like Portal does it really, really well, right? Where you get lost and you explore and you figure things out, but also every single level is a tutorial that teaches you a new thing, right? So it depends on your game. It depends on what your pillars are for that user. It depends on your vibe, man. Like if you want the player to have to figure it out for themselves, then that's the thing, and you're going to build it in that way. But you better build it in a way that they can figure it out. It better not be just like a, haha, you will never get this because I'm smarter than you. Can't be that, right? There's games that do that, don't do that. But if there's a way that they can figure out, if there's a language that they can build upon and understand, and everything is coherent and is like, that's your North Star and everything goes towards it, they will get there and it will be fine. But also we live in the age of Reddit and wiki and stuff. So people, you know, they'll be with it for an amount of time, they'll get bored and then they'll look it up. So when you're doing your play test, like you've got 2 minutes and then they lose interest and want to look for an answer, maybe that's when we can hold a little bit of hand. Like we can give them a little bit of a clue, a little bit of a nugget. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like you can add little bits where you need to.
Got ya. Thank you.
No worries. Also, if you have kids and you start introducing them to video games, you'll realize, actually, no, we need loads of hand holding. They need all of it. They need every single bit of it taught to them. Otherwise, they ask you for everything, and they're like, oh, no idea. And I think we're at time. So if you do have any other questions, I guess grab me afterwards, but we're done.